Where do we go when we die? It's a question that humans have been pondering for thousands of years. For the Christian medievals, there were only three options: heaven, hell, or purgatory. The problem was they didn't know what condition their soul was in until they died, and that was causing concern. Even the theologians, with all their ecclesiastical knowledge and writings, debated the problem without success, so what chance did the common people have? Well, today we're going to look at just that. Welcome to Medieval Madness. A vision of love. In the 13th century, English chronicler and monk Ralph of Coggeshall related a story from a witness to the afterlife. This spectator was not a high-born prince or a divine bishop, but rather a lowly peasant named Thurkill. Coggeshall explained that Thurkill's experience was not an isolated incident, and his tale should be listened to and respected. Quote, "So as to deprive evil men of a pretext to make excuses in their sins, and to render these same men completely inexcusable in their faithlessness, Almighty God has through the ages endowed almost every generation with witnesses, through whom he has deigned to reveal plainly some uncertain and hidden facets of his wisdom. This he did so they might learn openly and clearly, not just by word but also by sight, about the torments of the wicked and the shining dwellings of the just, and the state of souls after they leave the body, and what places of punishment or what kinds of torments await each sin, and finally by what suffrages these sins can be expiated after death." The humble Thurkill had been visited by St. Julian on the night of the 28th of October 1206. St. Julian took Thurkill's soul on a journey through the afterlife where he saw all the agonies of hell and purgatory. He also witnessed souls being judged and learned how the intervention of the living could help the dead leave purgatory and join the other blessed souls in heaven. Pagan afterlife imaginings were co-opted. Such stories proved the existence of the eternal afterlife. They helped maintain traditional practices of veneration for ancestors and rich burial. Story of Radbod in Wolfram's Vita indicates pagan concern for connecting with dead ancestors. King Harold of Denmark disinterred his pagan father and buried him in a Christian churchyard after his conversion in 960. The concept of journeys to the realm of the dead was not exclusive to medieval Christianity. In ancient Mesopotamia mythology, the hero Gilgamesh visits the underworld, as does Odysseus, the legendary Greek king of Ithaca. China also had early stories of visits to the afterlife. One of the oldest Christian texts, the Passion of Saints Perpetua and Felicity, presents a hopeful view of heaven. The Bible tells many tales of the afterlife, such as the fate of the rich man in the story of Lazarus and the Last Judgment in the book of Matthew. In England, pagan stories were passed down through to the Middle Ages, stories that talked of veneration of the dead and rich burials. In the tale of Radbod of Frisia, he refused to convert to Christianity and be baptized by the monk Wolfram because he was told that he would not be able to find any of his heathen ancestors in heaven. Radbod preferred to spend eternity in hell rather than be parted from them. This concern for connecting with dead ancestors was clear when King Harold of Denmark, after his conversion in the 10th century, reburied his pagan father in a Christian churchyard. It was stories like these, the vision of Thurkill, and the famous Divine Comedy by Dante that shaped how the medievals behaved in this world and what they expected in the next. And she's buying a stairway to heaven. The church officially accepted the concept of purgatory in the early Middle Ages, and it became a central doctrine. The idea had grown more widespread by the end of the era. The belief was that after death you would temporarily stay in purgatory and suffer there for your sins before being allowed into heaven. The flames there were about purification rather than punishment, and that proved more useful to the church. There was even a chance that a person could still be sent to hell if their soul was not adequately purified in purgatory. So the idea of having to spend any time there was a frightening prospect, almost as frightening as the prospect of hell itself. One way to absolve the body of all mortal sin was by having the living pray for the soul. Absolution from a priest was not enough to wipe the slate clean, and indulgences were a way to reduce the temporary punishment. A way of getting time off for good behavior. As the medieval age went on, the Christian belief in the concept of purgatory grew and intensified, and the idea was abused and twisted into a way of making huge amounts of money with the use of indulgences. This led to the apparent corruption of the church and helped to fuel the later Reformation. Indulgences could be granted as a way to pay for the sins committed in life. They were paid for by the living through prayer, good works, charitable acts, or pilgrimage. The church introduced two kinds of indulgence: partial, which dealt with part of the debt owed for the sin committed, and plenary, which took away all need for any punishment. In the 11th and 12th centuries, Christians who wanted to escape the horrors of purgatory at all costs were relieved that they could now avoid going there by taking part in the Crusades. In 1095, at the Council of Clermont, Pope Urban II guaranteed a plenary indulgence to any man who went to fight and save the Holy Land from Muslim rule. As time went on, the concept of indulgences became corrupted into a money-making scheme. The church devised a complicated system to evaluate how much time deducted from purgatory each indulgence was worth. The bigger the indulgence, the more time taken away. Because of the treasury of merit, there was a never-ending supply of good works that could be drawn upon for the remission of sins. The good works done by Jesus, the Virgin Mary, the saints, and others were collected in a kind of spiritual bank that could be drawn upon. But instead of people earning their indulgences fairly by good acts and Christian devotion, they were paying for them. Of course, wealthy people were only too happy to pay for churches, abbeys, and hospitals to be built on the expectation of having powerful bishops say prayers for their souls. The more money that was given, then the more chance you had of escaping the fires of purgatory altogether and going straight to heaven. And you could even buy indulgences for those who were already dead, no matter how they had lived their life on earth. The bottom line was money equaled salvation. Stuck in the middle. According to the historian Jacques Le Goff, as the 12th century dawned, the church's attitude towards what happened at the point of death was that, quote, "After the last judgment, men will be grouped for all eternity into two classes, the saved and the damned. A man's fate will be determined essentially by his behavior in life. Faith and good works militate in favor of salvation. Impiety and criminal sins consign the soul to hell." What happened on the way to one place or the other was all a bit vague. Some thought that you waited in the grave or some similar dark space. Some thought that souls lived in other places such as the bosom of Abraham while waiting to be admitted to heaven. Many in the church favored the idea of a final judgment being made immediately, and that the righteous, the martyrs, and the saints went to heaven right away. The bad went straight to hell. But some fell somewhere in the grey area between. What happened to them? Augustine believed that they had to undergo a trial to gain entry to heaven. For those who were only a bit bad, well, they still had to go to hell, but the torment there might not be as unbearable. Most of those who believed in an in-between world of heaven's waiting room thought that there would be some sort of purge there. Some said all the dead, including the righteous, had to go through this trial no matter their status in the eyes of the church, even saints, martyrs, and Jesus himself. But for them it was just a formality and of no real importance. The ghost of you. The medievals often told tales of seeing and even talking to ghosts. Most theologians liked to keep quiet on the matter. Thomas Aquinas accepted that ghosts existed, but wouldn't be pressed on what he thought they could be. The 12th century Cistercian monk Alca of Clairvaux also accepted that ghosts were real in his Liber de Spiritu et Anima. He too was unsure how they could be explained. Others thought ghosts might be demons who were trying to deceive the faithful, misinform, and terrify Christians. James of Clusa, the writer who died in 1465, thought that Christian souls could only appear to Christians, and any other ghost seen by Jews or other infidels had to be demonic. Clusa also thought that Christian souls needed help to get through purgatory. He pondered the question that if prayers for the dead were allowed, then why shouldn't the dead appear and ask for them? Even when they were tested, some ghosts were able to fool the unsuspecting. In the 13th century, Jacques de Vitry recounted the story of a young Catholic girl who was enticed into the Gnostic branch of Catharism, where she was visited by a ghost that took the form of her dead mother, urging her to join the movement. The girl went to the Catholic priests for advice, and a series of masses and prayers were able to reveal the apparition as a demon in disguise. The ghost of her real mother came back to lament her own fate and urged her daughter to remain true to her Catholic faith. In a 15th century story from Germany, the ghost of Henry Buschmann, who had died 40 years previous, appeared to his grandson Arndt. He materialized not as a human, but as a dog, and it took some time before Arndt was able to recognize that the spirit was not an evil entity. After consulting with the clerics, Arndt allowed the ghost to come forward and declare itself so that the two men could communicate. Henry told his grandson that he had a guardian angel and that he had seen a widow pass through purgatory, and she was now in the 8th choir of angels. It took another 6 months before Henry's own soul was released from purgatory. Another man whose ghostly soul was trapped in his son's home on Earth had killed 7 of his grandchildren after their baptisms to punish his son and his family for their sins. Medieval ideas of the afterlife are an intermingling of ghosts and purgatory, a reminder that the soul continued after death, and it was the responsibility of the living to pray for them so that they could leave that midway station and pass the rest of their hereafter in heaven. Today, ghosts are seen as something to be feared, even malevolent. For the medievals, they were the spirits that were in search of help. Thank you so much for watching this episode of Medieval Madness. Please do subscribe if you're enjoying these videos, and as always, I'll see you next week for another one. Until then, hope you all have an awesome week. Cheers!